My name is Agnieszka, I'm a researcher and I will have a pleasure of sharing with you today. Even louder than that, okay. I will have the pleasure of sharing with you today a personal rediscovery about research that I'm doing on a daily basis, specifically on what it can do for the company when it comes to filtering out bad ideas. So I want to share a few stories about that from my own company. But before I do, if I manage to change the slide, great. So I wanted to introduce you to this charismatic person, Mr. Ed Weissers, who's a world-renowned high-altitude mountaineer. He has successfully climbed all 14 8,000-meter-high mountain peaks without oxygen. So basically, he's a celebrity in the mountaineers world. And apart from that, he's also a very popular public speaker, especially for business, because as you know, climbing mountains is a lot like business. You have a specific goal, and then you need to create a path, you need to figure out how to slice it into smaller parts. To get there, you need to prepare, you need to have the right team, equipment, you need to do your research and learn from successes and mistakes of people who climbed the mountain before you, and so on and so forth. But the very interesting thing that this gentleman mentions very often in his speeches is that when he was climbing, he was always listening to the mountain. He was always taking in all the information about the weather conditions, the way he felt, the way his organism functioned, and the way he was breathing, to re-evaluate his decision about going further. And when the information he got drew him to the conclusion that he's not going to manage, he was retreating for the right reason, because what he figured out is this is the only thing he can do to be able to climb other mountains later on, or maybe even the same mountain, but on another day. This was the right thing for him. And for him it was a natural decision, but he also mentioned how difficult it was for other climbers very often, and that they failed to make this decision at the right moment and very often paid a very high price for this. So this is what I wanted to share with you today, a few stories about retreat for the right reasons. And since the stories have something to do with my company, I just briefly will introduce you to Codility so that you can figure out what we do. There are so many fantastic developer positions in different companies and so many great programmers out there to fill up those positions. The problem is when it comes to matching one with the other. So what Codility does, it is a service that allows you to take tasks. Those tasks are combined into tests, and those tests can be sent out to candidates for programmers to your company. They will test the algorithmic skills of the candidates, and if they perform well, they can go further on in the process. So basically, it's screening for programmers. The service itself, from the candidate's perspective, the interface for the candidate consists of a part where you have the task. They read the task, they can type in the solution, and then they can run automated tests and figure out whether the solution works well or it needs to be improved. So this is what Codility looks like. And the first story I wanted to share with you is how we ended up not exporting those tests to the candidates' IDEs, which are integrated developer environments. So because we figured out this is a perfect idea. This is great because this is how our interface looks like, and this is candidates' IDE with the environment they usually work in. It's so much more complex and sophisticated. It offers fantastic navigation features like navigation tree, and you can click through the files in the tabs, and you have autocomplete that basically helps you type in commands. Nothing better for a candidate than having a comfortable environment to work on the tests we send them. So we were thinking, how to do it. Well, technically, it's not that easy. It's a pretty complex idea. We came up with two ideas of how we could approach this. One was using our own Git repository. The other one is so complex that let us call it a black box for the rest of this presentation. But basically, we had those two ideas, and we said to ourselves, okay, so the only thing we need to know now is which way to go. So what we did in order to figure that out is we created simple mock-ups. They were mainly created by designers with a slightly automated by the developers who were already in the full mode, ready all convinced that this is a fantastic idea. And we organized something that I like to call pizza disaster check. So basically it's a small expert panel. In our case, these are experienced developers who come to our office, eat pizza, drink beer later on, and meanwhile they test the environment or the mock-ups in that case and discuss and let us get some insights on it. And that's exactly what we asked them. We have those two ideas, which one should we choose? And we were extremely surprised by the results of this conversation, because what happened is that it turned out that when they were working on both of these ideas, they came to a conclusion that our interface was basically ready to go. The minute they opened the test, they could start providing the solution. Whereas while exporting it to their own IDE, they needed a very time-consuming setup. So it was far less comfortable. We had a very easy way to test the code. The tests were already pre-coded in the interface, so it was extremely comfortable feature. What's more, we provided the same feature while exporting the tests to the IDE. The problem was nobody ever discovered it. It was slightly more complex to figure out where it is. Even when we pointed it out, nobody knew how to use it. So we failed to deliver the solution. And then we had, in this IDE, as I mentioned, we have this great navigation. But in our case, we provided at that time only single-filed tests or tasks. So that basically meant there was no need for navigation because there was nothing to navigate around. And the only difference in favor of IDE was the fact that IDE provided this auto-completion, which was like, you know, when you type in Word and the Word sort of guesses what you want to type, or God forbid, you know, in your mobile. Then my mobile always knows what I want to write before me. So this we did not have in our interface, and this was sort of missing from the experience. And then having those results, the product manager just took a step back and said, okay, so basically, guys, what you're saying is that we don't really need to export those tests to your IDE. We just need autocomplete in our own interface, right? And this is what this project evolved into. So we didn't provide the feature of exporting the tests, thanks to which we have managed to save approximately 3 months of development time, because it was a very complex and time-consuming project, as it was estimated. And we managed to immediately redirect all the efforts of the team to more pressing matters, including the autocomplete, which is just behind the corner right now. And the other story I wanted to share with you is how we ended not changing the time limit in our tests and the way we calculate it. So as you know, all tests have time limits, right? I'm sure you took graduation tests or driving license tests. So you have a time limit and you can distribute the time within it any way you want. So you can spend a lot of time on the first tasks and then speed up. It's your choice. The same kind of time limit we have in Codility. What some of our customers requested, and just to make sure, I wanted to stress these were very big fish. I mean, we really cared about making them happy. They said, okay, it's great. We want to keep this time limit for the test, but on top of that, we want to have a time limit per task, which means every task should be given time limit and the candidate cannot exceed it. They needed it because they believed it provided them with a better insight about the candidate's performance, but also in order to create integration with their own HR systems they had implemented in their own companies. So the customers made this request, sales team brought it to the product manager, and product manager, obviously, you know, caring for those important customers, brought it to the team for estimation, like, can it be done? Is it very difficult? And the team was, you know, estimating, yes, it can be done, it's not easy, it will take some time, and, you know, they estimated the details. So the PM confirmed to the sales, okay, we put it on the roadmap, this will be our top priority. Sales went back to the customers and said, don't you worry, yes, you'll be very happy, we will provide it, it's there. And sort of, you know, the project started on. And what I've noticed participating in dailies and planning for this project with the developers is that the developer team was actually of two minds about this idea. So some were saying, well, tough luck. I mean, this is a recruitment process. It's not easy. this will make it even more difficult, but you know, this is how the market works, yeah? So you know, we have to be responsive to it. And others said, but it will make the candidate's experience so much poorer. I mean, do you really want to go this direction? And me, myself, as a researcher, I thought, perfect. So this is the moment when I can actually provide some data. And my initial idea was I will provide the data, put it on the table for developers so that they ease to this development in perfect harmony once they establish which, you know, solution is the best. So what we did with our research team is we have taken all the tests from the previous year and we have recalculated results of every candidate that went through Codility tests from within the time in a way as if we had time limits per task. We just wanted to see what would happen, right? My idea was to show there will be no big tragedy if that happens. Well, I was kind of wrong. What we discovered is that if we introduce that change, approximately 34% of all candidates would be impacted. And that means their scores would be lower because they exceeded time on at least one task. They fitted within the test time limit, but the task time limit was exceeded. But even worse news was the second one, that 25% of the great candidates, the one who have scored over 90% on Codility test, would have far lower scores because they exceeded time on at least one task. So what would happen is basically our customers would never see those candidates. They would probably never call them back and say, well, hey, you did great, how about we meet and talk further on for this recruitment process. So, you know, what to do with this? What happened? So this is when I had the pleasure of seeing a very good product manager in action. So he took this decision to take this data and join all sales calls with the customers who requested the feature. And he said, look, this is what will happen. These are the numbers we came up with. We can't do this for you. We can't do it because it's not a good idea and this will harm your business. We don't want to be partners in harming your own business. And trust me, these were not easy conversations because those customers were sure they will get what they were promised. Nevertheless, the product manager stood the ground and refused. And you know, it took 2 weeks, but the company was very firm about this decision. And the consequences of it were different than expected, basically, because on one hand, yes, we saved time internally. We managed to release this team's engagement, and then they could redirect their energy towards other projects, and this was fantastic. What else happened is that the developers felt this sense of influence inside the company. I mean, they always had it, luckily, but even more so at that point when they saw that their own concerns were addressed and impacted the product directly. And on top of that, we felt really good about ourselves because we actually prevented our own customers from doing something bad to their business. And finally, the best thing that we did not expect, we were a little bit worried about that, is that the customers also noticed that fact. And that basically was visible because we built this kind of sense of expertise in their eyes, and they not only accepted the decision we made, but they renewed, which we were worried about, of course, once the contract ended, and some of them upgraded, and I would say some of those deals were the greatest deals in the history of our company. So this was a grand success for both the customers and the developer team inside Codility. So basically what I would like you to take out from this presentation is, you know, a few very basic things. And the first one refers directly to the story I just told. Don't be afraid to refuse your customers if you have the right reason for it, right? If you have the data to back it up. Usually this saying that we don't really have time or capacity is not the best argument to convince them, but very often we have better ones. So open the conversation if you're not sure it's the right direction. The other thing I wanted to mention is that even, you know, when you do research, don't be afraid of small samples. And I would like to stress, as a researcher, I'm in love with big samples. And I'm in love with multiple interviews because they make the data unbiased. And that's my aim. But sometimes I don't have this opportunity to do that and to collect this kind of data. I don't have the luxury of having huge amount of interviews, but sometimes you just need those few people to talk with you and share a perspective, and this perspective was exactly what you were missing in your project. And the last but not the least, I would like to remind you all, just as I just rediscovered it myself, that the main role of research is not how to tell you how to do your project best. It's to tell you whether to do this project at all. So basically, first you have to be sure that your hypothesis that this is the right way to go cannot be refuted, and then only you can figure out how to proceed further on. And that's basically all I have to share. I wanted to encourage you all to listen to the mountain and, if possible, apply all this in your own business. Thank you.
How often do you get, do you experience a situation when you show the data and people still don't believe you because they trust their guts?
I had this situation in other companies that I worked for, and my experience just says that if possible, if you expect this kind of outcome, do all you can to show the numbers and not the quotes. The quotes are already the meaningful part, but the numbers are the convincing ones. It happens, but then if you include more people in the decision-making process, it's more difficult to say, okay, you show me 50% of potential, I don't believe it, I believe my guts. It's more difficult to do it in public and to say to everyone, I see the numbers, but I don't care. Nevertheless, there are examples of good decisions in business made against the research. And examples where the ones I know are usually related with marketing and you know, refer to commercials that were, for example, presented in TV, but were never accepted by the focus groups or kind of any research tested. So it happens that guts tell you the right thing, but if you you know, if you have the right data and if you make a bigger decision-making panel, usually the data works.
Okay, I have quite similar question you touched already in the previous answer. So the question is, how do you know how to check when the data lies?
You know, the numbers are just as good as people who read them, right? So it's difficult for me to answer that question because I don't know what kind of distortion we are talking about. So one of the distortions I can think of when data lies is when you ask people about things in declarative research and then they say what they believe, that yes, they like it, yes, they will buy it, but obviously this is something they imagine and not something they do, right? So this actually happens. So when you do this kind of research in your category, one of the things you could do potentially, it's difficult, but it's doable, it's you can calibrate the data. How? So you can run an experiment in a panel when you can, for example, measure certain preferences or decisions, I will buy it, and later on check with people whether they bought it, and then see how many people from each of the level of I will buy it for sure, I will rather buy it, I won't buy it at all, blah, blah, how many of them will actually perform the action. So I saw data that in some categories 75% of people who said I will definitely do something actually end up doing it. Those who say I probably will do it, this is approximately 50% will actually take the step, take the action, and obviously the others ones will never be interested. So you can try to collect similar data for yourself and then calibrate it. That's one thing you can do. And the other thing you can do is you can always refer to observations, right? If you have this opportunity to watch behavioral data rather than declarative, then you will end up with numbers that do not lie. They represent the behaviors, right? So this is something that is a good point of estimation. Anything else?
Yeah. Agnieszka, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm here. And I guess the results also may depend a lot on the type of questions that you ask to your focus group. So what's the process behind creating those questions? Because I've heard that it may depend a lot on if they're closed or open, which kind of questions and how do you create it. So what's your process behind that?
So well, obviously, in terms of interviews that you run, yes, you need to go with open questions. And how to make sure your questions are open? Because sometimes you feel you're asking the open question. First of all, prepare your discussion guide in advance. Write down those questions that you want to ask, even if you will end up asking them a little bit differently. But once you prepare them, read those questions to yourself and make sure that you yourself can give two answers to each question. I like it because, and I hate it because. If you ask, why do you like it? Then obviously it's a wrong question, yeah? But why do you think so, or why do you feel like this, is the better way to go, right? So if you end up being able to give any answer to the question that you yourself have written, then probably your respondents will be able to do it as well. And yes, make sure, of course, the questions are as open as possible. Otherwise, you're just proving yourself right, which is probably not much of a research.